The galaxy was not kind, stars burned bright above, but on the ground life was full of chains. Empires of alien races ruled with cold hands, building cities of steel and fire, and beneath those towers the weak lived like shadows. Among them was a young alien girl, small and thin, her clothes the only thing she owned. She walked through the dusty market, her stomach empty, her eyes tired. Food was everywhere, fruit glowing under lights, meat cooked on hot flames, but to her it was all unreachable. She had no credits, no family, no power. All she had were her clothes, torn and simple, and sometimes even those were not enough. She whispered to herself, voice shaking, "All I have are my clothes." The words felt heavy. She had said them many times before. Each time they cut her pride smaller. Each time they reminded her that survival meant losing dignity. At the edge of the market, cruel traders stood like vultures. They watched the weak, waiting for someone desperate. They smiled when they saw her. "Hungry again?" one said, his sharp teeth showing. She lowered her head. He held up bread, fresh and warm. "Take it," he said, "but you know the price." The girl froze, her hands shaking. She hated this game. She hated their laughter. But hunger was stronger than hate. Her stomach twisted, her body begged for food. And slowly, she reached for her clothes. Her heart broke with every movement. The crowd did not care. They had seen it before, a life worth nothing in the Empire's eyes. The girl closed her eyes, ashamed. But then, a new voice spoke, calm and deep. "Stop," it said. The air around them shifted. The traders turned their heads, and she opened her eyes, confused. A man stood there, different from the rest. He was tall, not like her kind, not like the traders. His skin, his face, his eyes, they marked him as something rare. He was a human, the crowd whispered. Sue. Prized. Humans were few, scattered, often ignored or mocked. Weak, they called them. Soft, they called them. But this one looked different. He did not look weak. He did not look afraid. The trader laughed. "What do you want, human? She is nothing." The man did not answer right away. He walked closer, his steps slow but steady. He looked at the girl, not with hunger, not with cruelty, but with something strange, something she had not seen in a long time. Kindness. He reached into his bag and pulled out food. Simple bread, but clean, honest, not poisoned with shame. He held it out to her. "Eat," he said, his voice firm. The girl hesitated. She looked at the traders, their faces twisted with anger. She looked at the crowd, waiting for her to fail, and she looked at him, the human who stood so calmly. She wanted to believe, but trust was dangerous. "Take it," he said again, softer this time. His eyes held no lies. Her hands moved on their own, trembling as they touched the bread. The smell filled her nose. Her throat tightened. Tears burned her eyes as she took a bite. For the first time in many days, real food filled her stomach. It was more than bread. It was hope. The traders spat on the ground. "Stupid human," one said. "You will regret this." The man only smiled, a strange, quiet smile, the kind that carried no fear, the kind that made the traders uneasy. They stepped back, unsure. It was only bread, yet the way he gave it changed everything. The girl ate slowly, still watching him. Who was he, and why did he help? No one helped, not here, not ever. And yet this human did. She whispered softly, almost to herself. "Why? Why would you do this?" The man looked at her and said nothing. Only that smile remained, calm and steady. And in that silence, something powerful grew, something she did not yet understand. The crowd soon moved on. The traders cursed and left. But she and the human stayed. The night grew colder. The stars above burned on. And in the broken world where chains ruled and hope was forbidden, a small spark had appeared, a spark that could not be unseen, a spark that would burn brighter with each passing day. And though the girl did not know it yet, though the traders could not believe it yet, though the empire laughed in its high towers, that spark was dangerous, that spark was human, and soon the galaxy would feel its fire. The night after the market was restless, the girl sat in a corner of a broken shelter, holding the bread close. She had eaten, yet hunger was still in her eyes, hunger for safety, hunger for kindness. And the human sat nearby, quiet, watching the stars as if he belonged to another world. She did not know his name. She only knew one thing. He had risked himself for her. No one did that, not in this world. Here, helping the weak was the same as painting a target on your back. So why had he stepped forward? Why had he chosen her, a nobody with nothing? The memory of the trader's cruel laughter still echoed. "Stupid human," they had said. "You will regret this." The girl feared the morning. She knew the traders would not forget. The empire always punished kindness. And yet the human did not seem worried. He sat calm, his hands steady, his eyes deep with secrets. Finally, she asked in a broken voice, "Why did you help me?" The human turned to her. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, with a small shrug, he answered, "Because no one else would." The words were simple, yet they hit her like fire. No one else would. It was true, but hearing it from him made her chest ache. She wanted to ask more, but fear tied her tongue. The next morning, trouble came. The traders returned, but this time they did not come alone. 4 guards walked with them, armored and armed. They pushed through the crowd, their boots heavy on the ground. Everyone stepped back, except the human. He stood still, his face calm, as if he had been waiting. The leader pointed at him. "You broke the law," the guard growled. "No one feeds a slave without permission." The girl lowered her head, shame burning her cheeks. She had dragged him into danger. This was her curse, she thought. She brought ruin to anyone near her, but the human spoke, his voice steady. "She is not a slave," he said. The crowd gasped. No one said such words aloud. It was madness, it was death. The guard sneered. "Not a slave, she is nothing." The human's eyes narrowed. "No one is nothing," he replied. The words spread like a whisper in the crowd, simple but sharp. They were dangerous words, words that cut through chains. The guards laughed, but their laughter was uneasy. This man was not afraid. He stood tall though he was alone, and fear is what the empire used to rule. But here stood a human who carried no fear that made him dangerous. The leader lifted his weapon. "You will be punished," he declared. But before he could strike, the human stepped forward. He did not draw a weapon. He did not raise his hands. He simply looked into the guard's eyes and smiled. It was not a smile of joy, not a smile of mockery. It was calm, steady, almost gentle, but it carried weight. It made the guard hesitate. The girl watched in disbelief. The human had no power, no army, no weapons, yet somehow the air felt heavy. The crowd leaned closer. Even the guards seemed uncertain. What was this man? What gave him such strength? The traitor pushed forward, angry and red. "Kill him," he shouted. "Show the crowd what happens to fools." The guard raised his weapon again, but his hand shook. The human's smile did not break. And then he spoke again. "If you strike me, others will say." The words fell into the market like thunder. The crowd shivered. No one had spoken like this in years. The empire was strong. The empire was eternal. That was what they were told. But here stood a man who said otherwise. A man who dared to speak of rising. The guard froze. The traitor screamed louder. "Do it!" But the guard hesitated, and in that hesitation, the human simply stepped past him. He placed his hand on the girl's shoulder and guided her away. No fight, no blood, just calm defiance. And somehow, that was stronger than violence. The girl followed him, her legs weak, her heart racing. Every step felt like a dream. The guards did not stop them. The crowd did not move. Only silence followed. Silence filled with questions, filled with new thoughts. When they were far enough, the girl whispered, "They will kill you for this." The human shook his head. "They cannot kill what they do not understand." She looked at him, confused and frightened. "Who are you?" she asked. For the first time, he gave an answer. "My name is Daniel," he said. "A human." His name felt strange in her mouth, yet powerful. Daniel, he had chosen, he had defied, he had risked everything for someone like her. And in her heart, for the first time, she felt something new. Not fear, not shame, not hunger, but the small beginning of trust. That night, while the stars burned above, she thought of his words again. "No one is nothing." She repeated them softly, as if they might disappear if she forgot. And deep inside, she felt them take root. The human had made his choice, and his choice had already begun to change the world. The days after the market felt strange to the girl. She had walked alone all her life, silent and unseen. Now there was someone beside her, a human named Daniel. His steps were calm, his eyes steady, his voice quiet but filled with strength. At first, she did not trust him. Trust was a dangerous thing. It could break faster than glass. She kept her distance, watching him with cautious eyes. But Daniel never pushed, never demanded. He simply walked beside her, as if her presence mattered, as if she was more than nothing. One night they sat near the broken walls of an abandoned temple. The stars above were cold, the ground beneath hard. Daniel broke bread in half and gave her a piece. She stared at it, then at him. "You should eat first," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "You need it more than I do," he said. Her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She wanted to ask why, but the words stuck in her throat. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. He chewed his food with quiet patience, as if this simple meal was enough. The silence between them was heavy, but not cruel. It was different. It was calm. Finally, she whispered, "They will come for us." Daniel nodded, his face serious. "Yes, they will," he said, "but let them come." She frowned, fear filling her voice. "You are only one man. They are many." Daniel looked at her, his eyes firm. "One man can still stand," he said, "and sometimes that is enough." She did not understand, not fully, but his words burned inside her. She turned them over in her mind again and again. One man can still stand. Could that really be true? Could one person matter against an empire of chains? The next morning, they walked through a small village on the edge of the empire. Slaves bent their heads as overseers shouted orders. Children carried water until their arms shook. Women gave away their dignity for scraps of food. It was the same story she had lived her whole life. And yet, something felt different now. Because she walked beside a man who looked at it all without fear, one overseer barked at them, "Move along, human, or we will teach you your place." Daniel did not. "Stop walking," he did not answer, but the way he carried himself, tall and unbroken, made the overseer step back. The girl noticed, her eyes widening. How could silence be stronger than shouting? How could silence be stronger than shouting? How could calmness scare men more than weapons? Later that night, she asked him again, "Why do you help me?" Daniel leaned back against a wall, watching the stars. His voice was quiet, almost sad. "Because I have seen too many fall," he said. "I will not let one more fall while I can still stand." His words were simple, yet they shook her heart. She had always believed she was alone, invisible, forgotten. But this man, this human, had seen her. He had chosen to help, not for gain, not for power, but simply because it was right. It felt unreal, like a dream. She whispered, "Do you not fear death?" Daniel looked at her and his eyes held no lies. "Of course I do," he said, "but fear cannot rule me." She could not answer, her chest tight, her throat heavy. She turned away so he would not see the tears in her eyes. As days passed, she began to notice small things, the way he shared food without hesitation, the way he placed himself between her and danger, the way he listened, even when she said nothing at all. Slowly, the wall of fear inside her began to crack. Slowly, she began to trust. One night, as they rested by a fire of broken wood, Daniel told her stories, stories of Earth, a blue world with skies free of chains, oceans so wide they swallowed the horizon, mountains so tall they touched the clouds, and people, billions of them, living, laughing, fighting, a world where freedom was not a dream, but a right. The girl listened with wide eyes. She had never imagined such a place. Her world was dust, chains, and silence. But in his words, she saw colors. She saw hope. She whispered softly, "It sounds like paradise." Daniel smiled, but his smile was bittersweet. "Paradise is fragile," he said, "and sometimes it must be fought for." She did not fully understand, but she felt the weight of his words, and for the first time, she imagined a different life, a life without chains, a life where she could walk with her head high. But not everyone was blind. Rumors spread in the villages, whispers of a human who defied overseers, a girl who no longer walked with shame. People began to watch them, to follow them with quiet eyes. Some saw hope, others saw danger, and above them all, the empire listened. One evening as they prepared to rest, Daniel looked at her seriously. "You have a choice," he said. She frowned, not understanding. "You can walk away, find safety, hide in the shadows," he continued. "Or you can walk with me, into fire, into danger, but maybe into freedom." Her heart pounded. Choice. No one had ever given her a choice. She looked at him, at the man who had stood against traitors, against guards, against fear itself, and slowly, her lips trembled as she whispered, "I will walk with you." Daniel nodded once, firm, as if he had expected nothing else. And in that moment, their bond became more than survival. It became trust, fragile but real, a bond that could shake chains, a bond that could light fire. And in the dark corners of the empire, where whispers turned to fears, the masters began to notice. They saw the girl, no longer broken, no longer silent, walking beside a human who did not bow, and they understood. This was not just a pair of wanderers. This was the start of something dangerous. This was the start of a storm. The empire was built on fear. For centuries, fear had kept slaves silent and overseers powerful, but fear is fragile and whispers travel faster than chains. Soon, whispers of a human named Daniel reached the ears of those who ruled. It began with traders grumbling in smoky taverns. "He gives food to slaves," one hissed. "He speaks like they are people," another spat. They laughed at first, calling him a fool, but laughter turned to unease. Unease turned to anger because something was changing and they felt it. In the villages, slaves began to look up instead of down. They began to talk quietly when overseers were not near. A girl walked beside a human, no chains on her arms, no fear in her steps. To the Empire, this was more dangerous than any weapon. Hope, once born, could not be killed so easily. Far away in a hall of dark stone, alien lords gathered. Their faces were sharp, their voices cold. One slammed his hand on the table. "This human makes trouble," he growled. Another sneered. "Humans are weak. Let him play hero. He will die soon." But the eldest among them, his eyes glowing like embers, shook his head. "Do not laugh," he said. "Weakness can spread faster than strength, and this one spreads weakness of fear." The lords argued, some calling for his death, some saying he was not worth notice, but all agreed on one thing. If hope grew, their empire would tremble. So they sent word. Watch the human break the girl, remind the slaves of their place. Meanwhile, Daniel and the girl moved from place to place. He carried himself with the same calm strength. She walked taller beside him now, no longer whispering her shame. And wherever they went, eyes followed. A spark had lit, and sparks seek fire. One evening, they entered a mining village. The workers there were broken, their backs bent from years of labor. The overseer barked at them, his voice sharp like a whip. "Who are you to walk freely here?" he demanded. Daniel did not answer. He simply looked at the workers. His gaze met theirs, steady and human. And something passed between them, a silent promise, a quiet defiance. The overseer raised his weapon, but the workers did not move away. They stood still, their tired eyes fixed on Daniel. For the first time in years, they did not look down. The overseer hesitated, his power slipping like sand through his fingers, and all Daniel did was stand. The girl felt it too. The bond between them was no longer just between her and him, it was spreading, reaching others. His courage was contagious, and it terrified those in power. Back in the stone hall, the lords received reports. Workers hesitate to obey, whispers of rebellion grow, slaves repeat the human's words. The eldest lord's voice was sharp. "This is not accident, this is seed of fire." "We will crush him before the fire grows," another declared. They sent hunters, skilled killers loyal to the empire. They sent spies, shadows that followed every step, but each report brought more unease. The human did not fight with blades, he fought with words, with presence, with something unseen, and that was harder to kill. One night the girl overheard villagers speaking. They say the human smiles even when threatened. They say he told the guards no one is nothing. They say he walks with a girl who once begged in the dust, and now she walks like a queen. The girl's heart beat fast. Was she truly changing, or was it simply his light shining on her? Daniel noticed her silence and asked, "What troubles you?" She shook her head, then whispered, "They speak of us. They look at me as if I am more than I am." Daniel's eyes softened. "You are more," he said. "You always were." Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she was not just a broken thing, but hope was dangerous. She knew. Hope could be crushed, and the lords were sharpening their claws. In the grand hall, plans were made. "They will come to the city," one lord said. "Trap them there, humiliate them before the crowd." Another hissed, "Do not humiliate, destroy, so no one dares to hope again." The decision was made. The empire would act, and the storm would soon fall upon them. But out in the villages, Daniel kept walking, the girl at his side. Neither of them knew how closely the empire watched. Neither of them knew how many enemies gathered in the shadows. Yet even if they had known, Daniel's steps would not have changed. For every time he walked through dust, another slave lifted their eyes. Every time he spoke, another chain grew lighter, and the lords could not stop the whisper that spread like fire. "No one is nothing," the people repeated, softly at first, then stronger, and the more they said it, the more it became truth. The lords had reason to fear, because in their arrogance they had forgotten one thing. Empires are not destroyed by armies alone. They are destroyed when their people stop being afraid, and that fear was breaking piece by piece, word by word, because of one human, because of Daniel. Night fell over the broken streets of the village. Shadows stretched long across the stone walls. The girl sat close to a fire, its small flames flickering. Daniel sat beside her, calm as always, his eyes scanning the darkness. She had begun to notice something strange about him. He carried no weapon, no armor, no sign of strength. And yet, people stepped back when he walked. Overseers hesitated when he stared at them. It was as if his courage was its own kind of weapon, invisible but sharp. But courage alone could not stop blades. And soon, blades came for him. The traders who had lost face in the market did not forget. They returned with others, a group of thugs dressed in black leather, their eyes cold. They waited until the fire burned low, then stepped out of the shadows. The girl's heart froze. She grabbed Daniel's sleeve, whispering, "They are here." Daniel only nodded, as if he had been expecting them. His calmness frightened her more than the danger. The leader of the thugs sneered, "Human," he spat. "You should have stayed quiet." Daniel stood, his body relaxed, his hands empty. "I will not bow," he said simply. The thugs laughed, a harsh sound. "You will bow when your bones are broken," one growled. They rushed him. The girl screamed, certain he would fall. One mocked. N swung a heavy club, but Daniel moved aside with speed she did not expect. His hand shot out, grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and the club dropped. In the same motion, Daniel struck the man's shoulder, sending him crashing into the dirt. The others attacked, but Daniel flowed between them like water. He did not fight with wild rage. He fought with precision, with control. Each move was simple, each strike placed with purpose. He used their strength against them, turning their attacks into their downfall. The girl could hardly believe her eyes. This was not the weak human the Empire mocked. This was something else, something fierce. Every time she thought he would fall, he stood stronger. Every time they tried to overwhelm him, he broke free. One thug pulled a blade and swung for his chest. The girl gasped, certain the strike would end him, but Daniel leaned aside, caught the man's arm, and drove his elbow into the thug's stomach. The blade clattered to the ground. Daniel did not take it. He did not need it. One by one the thugs fell. Groaning and broken on the dirt, the leader stumbled back, fear in his eyes. "This is not possible," he hissed. "You are only human." Daniel stepped closer, his shadow long in the firelight. "I am human," he said, his voice like iron, "and that is enough." The leader turned and fled into the night. The others dragged themselves after him, their pride shattered. The girl stood frozen, her hands shaking. She had seen cruelty, she had seen violence, but this was different. Daniel had fought without hate, without bloodlust. He had fought with purpose, with mercy. She whispered softly, How did you do that?" Daniel sat down again, breathing steady. "I learned," he said simply. "Humans have always been outnumbered, always weaker than someone else, so we learned to fight in other ways." The girl stared at him, her chest tight. It was not just his strength, it was his spirit. He did not fight to kill, he fought to protect. He fought because he chose to, not because he had to. And in that, she saw something greater than power. She saw humanity itself. The next day, word spread fast. Slaves whispered of the human who defeated armed thugs with bare hands. Some laughed, calling it a story, but others believed, and belief was more dangerous than blades. In the villages, workers began to stand a little taller. In the mines, whispers grew louder. "No one is nothing," they repeated. "If the human can stand, so can we." The Empire's overseers felt the shift. Their shouts did not carry as far. Their threats did not cut as deep. Something was changing, and they could not stop it. The girl walked beside Daniel, her steps lighter now. She no longer looked at the ground. She looked forward, as if she finally had a path. She whispered to him one night, "You frighten them." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "They frighten themselves. I only remind them of what they fear most, that their power is fragile." The girl thought about this long into the night. Was it true? Could the Empire, vast and strong, really be fragile? She remembered the thugs running, their courage broken. She remembered the overseer stepping back without reason, and she began to wonder, maybe power was not chains. Maybe power was choice. And Daniel had chosen to fight, to protect, to defy, to stand. In the great stone hall, the lords heard the new reports. "A band of our men defeated, a village whispers rebellion." The youngest lord snarled, "Then crush them harder," but the eldest only narrowed his glowing eyes. "No," he said. "It is not fists we fight now. It is fire, and fire spreads." Back in the villages, the fire spread indeed. Daniel's power was not his fists, not his speed, not his strength. It was the way he turned fear into courage. It was the way he reminded others of something they had forgotten, that no one is nothing, that even one human can stand against many, and that sometimes mercy is stronger than cruelty. The girl walked beside him, no longer a shadow, her head held high, her steps proud, and the people saw her too. She was proof that chains could be broken, that dignity could return, and the Empire watched with growing dread, because they knew now the human's power was not just his own, it was becoming everyone's. The days turned into weeks, and everywhere Daniel walked, whispers followed him. At first it was only small words, spoken in corners, but whispers are like seeds. They grow when they find soil, and the Empire had given plenty of soil, soil of pain, of hunger, of chains. The girl noticed it first. When they entered a village, people no longer looked away. Their eyes lingered on Daniel, their shoulders lifted when he passed. Children stared wide-eyed, clutching their mothers' hands. Men paused in their work, and women whispered behind covered mouths. They all watched the human, the man who stood tall when others bent. One night by a fire, the girl asked him, "Do you see it the way they look at you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "They are waiting." "Waiting for what?" she whispered. "For someone to remind them who they are," he replied. The girl frowned. unsure. "They are slaves," she said bitterly. "What else can they be?" Daniel's eyes glowed in the firelight. "They are people," he said firmly, "and people can rise." The words stayed with her. She repeated them in her heart. People can rise. It sounded impossible, yet she had begun to believe, for had she not risen from the dust herself, walking now with no chains, and if she could, why not others? But the Empire also saw hunters returned with reports. Spies carried stories. "The people repeat his words," they said. "The girl walks like a queen. The human speaks of rising. Their hope grows." The alien lords grew restless. Hope was more dangerous than swords. Hope was harder to kill, so they plotted. They sent more soldiers. They spread more fear. They promised punishment to any who listened to the human, but threats that once ruled now began to break, because courage is also a seed, and Daniel had planted many. One day, in a dusty square, an overseer struck a boy for dropping a basket. The whip cracked and the boy cried out. But before the second strike fell, Daniel caught the overseer's arm. The crowd gasped, silence heavy in the air. Daniel's voice was calm. "No more," he said. The overseer spat. "You dare touch me, human." Daniel's grip tightened, and the whip slipped from the overseer's hand. He dropped to his knees in fear. The crowd stared, their hearts pounding. It was not just Daniel who had spoken, it was their own voices hidden inside, waiting to break free. That night, the girl saw something she never thought she would see. Slaves gathering, not to work, not to beg, but to listen. Daniel stood before them, his voice steady. "I am no king, I am no master, I am only human," he said. "But I tell you this, no one is nothing, not you, not me, not anyone." The crowd murmured, their eyes bright. "We have been told we are weak," Daniel continued, "but weakness is not chains, weakness is forgetting who we are." The girl felt her chest swell, his words were fire, and the people breathed it in. The Empire's spies watched from the shadows, their reports carried fear. The people gather, they speak his words, they believe him. In the stone hall the lords roared. "Enough," one shouted, "he must die." But the eldest lord shook his head. "If he dies he will become legend, and legends cannot be killed." The others fell silent, uneasy. They knew he was right. Killing him might only make him stronger. Meanwhile, Daniel and the girl traveled on. She felt her strength growing with each day. She no longer whispered in shame. She spoke to others, telling them what Daniel had told her. "We are not nothing," she said, and when they heard her, they believed, for she was proof, once broken, now standing tall. One evening, as they walked through the ruins of an old city, the girl asked him, "Do you know what you are doing?" Daniel smiled faintly. "No," he said, "but I know what must be done." She frowned. "And what is that?" "To remind them of their fire," he answered. "They already have it, they only forgot." The girl looked at him with new eyes. She had once thought him strange, reckless, even foolish. But now she saw he was not trying to be a hero, he was trying to give others the chance to be their own heroes. In villages, in mines, in markets, his words spread. Hope grew like storm clouds, heavy and unstoppable. And the Empire trembled, for storms can be predicted, but not controlled. And this storm was not made of lightning or rain, it was made of people. People who began to stand, people who began to rise. The girl stood by Daniel one night, watching the stars. Her voice was soft, but sure. "You have changed me," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No," he replied. "You changed yourself. I only showed you the mirror." She smiled for the first time in years. A real smile. It felt strange on her face, but good. And in that smile, Daniel saw what he had been waiting for. The storm was no longer his alone. It belonged to her. It belonged to them, and the Empire could no longer ignore it. The rising storm had begun, and soon it would strike. The Empire had been patient for too long. It had listened to whispers, it had watched villages stir, but now the whispers had become voices, and voices were dangerous, so the lords of the Empire gave their command. End this human, end his words, end their hope. Soldiers marched through the streets of the great city, their armor shining, their boots heavy. Hunters with sharp blades and cruel smiles followed behind. The people lowered their heads, fear pressing against their hearts, but even in fear they whispered still. "No one is nothing." Daniel and the girl walked through the same city. They felt the tension in the air. Every corner held eyes. Every shadow held danger. The girl's hands trembled, but her steps did not stop. She looked at Daniel and whispered, "They are waiting for you." Daniel nodded, his voice calm. "They are not waiting for me," he said. "They are waiting for themselves." In the center of the city, a great square opened wide. Thousands of slaves were gathered there, forced to watch. The alien lords stood high on a black balcony, their eyes cold. At their signal, soldiers dragged forward prisoners, men and women who had dared to speak Daniel's words, their faces bruised, their spirits heavy. The lords raised their hands. "This is what happens to those who defy us," they declared. The crowd shivered, old fear tightening its grip. And then Daniel stepped forward, his voice cut through the silence, steady and strong. "No," he said. The lords froze. The crowd gasped. Daniel stood tall in the open square, his eyes locked on the balcony. "You will not break them. You will not break us." The soldiers rushed forward, weapons ready. The girl's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to pull him back, but Daniel did not move. He faced them with nothing but his hands, and when the first soldier struck, Daniel caught the blow and threw him down. The second leer unged, but Daniel spun and sent him crashing to the ground. The crowd roared, not in fear but in awe. The girl felt fire rise in her chest. This was the moment, this was the turning point. She stepped forward, her voice loud for the first time in her life. "We are not nothing," she shouted. Her words echoed through the square. The crowd gasped, then voices joined hers. "We are not nothing," they cried louder and louder. The lords looked down in shock. The soldiers hesitated, their power slipping. Daniel fought on, not as a warrior of rage, but as a shield. He struck when he must. He spared when he could. Every move showed mercy. Every action showed strength. The people saw, the people learned. They began to push back. They grabbed stones, sticks, anything they could find. And for the first time in centuries, slaves struck overseers. Chains rattled not as bonds, but as weapons. The square turned from silence to storm. The lords shouted from their balcony, "Stop them, crush them, kill the human." But their voices were drowned by the roar of the crowd. The storm Daniel had spoken of was here, and no command could hold it back. The girl climbed onto the steps of the square. Her voice rang out over the chaos. "We are people. We are more. We will not bow again." She stood tall, her eyes blazing. Once she had whispered in dust, now she shouted before thousands, and they answered her with a roar. The slaves were no longer slaves. They were a people awakened. Daniel fought until his body ached, but he did not fall. The soldiers began to retreat. Fear spread in their ranks, for how do you fight a crowd that no longer fears you? How do you command chains when they are broken? The lords pulled back, their balcony shaking with their rage. "This is not possible," one hissed. Another slammed his fist. "They are only slaves." But the eldest lord's face was pale. "They are no longer slaves," he whispered. "They are something else now." The battle ended not with silence but with voices, the square filled with chants, with hope, with fire. Daniel stood at the center, blood on his hands but calm in his eyes. The girl stood beside him, her chin high, her spirit unbroken. Together they looked at the crowd, and the crowd looked back, not as broken people, but as a rising storm. That night, as the fires burned and the empire licked its wounds, the girl turned to Daniel. "You changed everything," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No," he answered softly. "You changed everything. I only reminded you of what was already inside." She felt tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of strength, of freedom. For the first time she believed in tomorrow. For the first time she believed they could win. And high above, in their stone halls, the lords knew the truth. Their empire had been shaken, their chains had been cracked. The storm had risen, and nothing could stop it now. Because one human had stood, because one girl had spoken, because the people remembered, no one is nothing, and mercy is stronger than fear.